Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar dealing with succession on the family dairy farm. I'd just like to introduce our guests on the webinar. David Cotton and his daughter Emma from Bridge Farm in Somerset. Oliver Hall from the Anderson Centre. Iain McVicar from Albert Goodman Chartered Accountants. Good afternoon to you all.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Just some housekeeping. I'll be brief. All attendees are muted. Please ask questions throughout the webinar. To the right of your screen is an orange arrow. If you click on that, there's a drop-down box. Near the bottom is a chat box, and you just type your questions in there. We welcome questions throughout. The questions are anonymous. Your name is not revealed. It's only known to the organizers. The webinar will be recorded and be available on YouTube to watch it afterwards. And if you are registered for Dairy Pro, please claim your points. Just put your farm name and postcode and the Dairy Pro number if you have it in the message box, and you'll receive your points. I think that's about the end of the housekeeping. I'll just go over to David to give us an update on Bridge Farm. David, what's been happening since our last webinar, which I think was in March?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Obviously, quite a lot's happened since March. Not least the weather, of course, which we're, good old British weather. And it turns out that it was our wettest May since 2007. And I just had the stats come through, and it was the 5th wettest May on record. So that certainly shows how wet it was. We got through April without any trouble, obviously, because it was dry and cold. The grass was running late, but we managed to keep our cows on about a 20-acre piece. We had enough grass there to get us through the worst of the wet. We trashed that field a bit, but at least it meant that most of the grazing platform is in good nick. We've got a TB test again tomorrow, so fingers crossed for this week, because it's down to that time of year again where we've got we're on 60-day testing at the moment. So any store cattle we sell have to go through the orange market. We've sent 32 on last month. That was Angus crosses, and they averaged nearly £1,000 a piece, so that was quite pleasing. So it seems that the orange market doesn't really, for decent sized cattle, doesn't really make any difference to the price, and we've got another 47 to go after the next test. Fingers crossed that we can get them through and get clear. The milk's starting to tail off a bit now because we dry off at the end of the month, so we've got 145 to calve in September out of the 250. So we are looking to start drying off. 1 or 2 have started drying off themselves now because we've cut the cake out completely, but we'll have a big drying off session at the end of the month. We've done second cut. We've managed to get an early first cut in April. We've done second cut, and the way it's regrown now, I think we'll be doing third cut at the beginning of July. So there will be room for a decent fourth cut as well. And we've just been doing a bit of haymaking. I've got to go baling this afternoon.
All right. No, good. Oh, there's a lot going on, and the weather's on your side at long last. No, good. Thanks for that. Now, turning to the succession, David, please tell us, when did you start thinking about succession, and what are the key areas you've thought about it up to date?
Well, I've always had succession in the back of my mind, because it's one of those things. I was fortunate that my father stood back from the business when I was 28. So, and he went off and did things off farm. He was a county councillor. He ran the orchards next door. So it's always been in the back of my mind not to go on for too many years or too long. And you see it so often where people are still holding the reins long after they should be, really. And I was reading about a farmer at the weekend who was 79, and you think, should you still be a farmer at 79 on your own? I'm not quite so sure on that one. So maybe that with the proposed retirement fund coming in, that might make a few people think about that. But succession's always been on my mind, and also this year I'll be 60. So it struck me that in the next 5 years I need to think about retirement. And with Emma now home from university and having done an agricultural degree and now training for accountancy, in 5 years' time, she'd be 30. So really sort of equivalent period, similar to myself when I took up the business. So I'm sort of looking at that. And, you know, in most businesses, you change your boss every 7 years, but in farming, you're stuck with the same one for 30 odd years or even longer. So unless you keep retraining, then it actually comes a point when you're not the fastest on the street, and also you're not up to date with everything. So that was really my thinking on that. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to discuss all of this. As you can see from the family photo here, there is 3 generations of us, mum and dad at the front there, and then Emma, Erica and Lena at the back. Erica is Emma's younger sister. She's 21 months younger than Emma and has no interest in the farming side of things, but has just started her career and is moving to Lisbon in the autumn with her job. So it's a good opportunity to start thinking about it and how we can incorporate the next generation, as well as still having the previous generation alive and kicking.
Yeah, no, good. No, well, thanks for that. And Emma, you know, you've got your career off farm. How do you feel about, you know, starting to think about it from your side, being involved in the business going forward? What are your thoughts?
Sometimes if I think too hard about it, it gets quite overwhelming. I'm a person who gets overwhelmed quite easily, but no, I've definitely been a lot more involved. Pretty much since I left school, I've been a lot more involved. So yes, gradually, just a gradual process, I think would suit me. So the 5-year time frame works well for me.
Yeah, so I would assume, Emma, you've done a bit of practical work growing up on the farm and being involved that way as well. So
yeah, definitely
been involved probably for quite a few years in one way or the other. No, very good. Excellent. Well, the big thing is that you've started thinking about it. So I'm going to hand over now to Oliver Hall to do the presentation and lead the discussion. Over to you, Oliver.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to start sharing the presentation now. Yeah, for those who don't know me, my name is Oliver Hall. I am one of the dairy consultants at the Anderson Centre. Just check you can all see my screen okay now, I hope.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
In terms of what we've got today then, I've broken it down into the sort of following chunks. First of all was sort of what are the different elements of succession planning, because it's very easy to just flippantly say, oh, I'm going to deal with succession, but there's sort of multiple things you need to do behind that. We're going to talk a little bit about timing and planning of that succession. Then we're going to look at the succession of the management of the business, so the actual running of the business. And then we're going to look at sort of how you would approach dividing up the returns from a dairy farm. And then basically some options for future business structures, and a little bit at the end about thinking about tax. I think, as we said, happy to take questions throughout that will get fired into me as we're going along. In terms of breaking down succession, I think obviously today we only have sort of 45 minutes in terms of what I'm doing. There is a whole lot of stuff outside of this I think that you probably should be aware of if you're watching this today. You know, we were really pushing against an open door when I was invited down to spend some time with David and Emma. If you have challenges with people in your family or your business that either don't want to communicate about this, find it very hard to talk about these sort of things, there's a whole softer side of how to approach that, how to start the conversations. We're not really going to cover that today, but I know that might be relevant for some people. So make sure you reach out and get some help if you are in that situation. There's a whole load of mechanics as well in terms of sort of wills, powers of attorney, technicalities of accounts and capital accounts. We will touch on bits of that today, but again, you have to make sure all that's in place so whatever you've agreed sort of happens. And also power of attorney is very important for stuff in terms of being able to operate businesses. I've seen a few examples of businesses where the bank account gets shut because they haven't sorted out things like power of attorney properly. I think also it's worth making it as aware that, you know, when we think about this, this is not unique to dairy farming. You would see that a lot of, you know, any business has to deal with succession in any line of work, in any sort of ownership as well. So even, you know, if you've got someone who owns a car garage or a shop in town, they will have to think about how they pass that business on to the next generation, or they may choose to just sell it as part of their retirement planning, or they may do a management buyout and sell it to the people that are managing the business. All those things are interesting and relevant to what we're going to talk about. And also, even in the corporate world, you may bump into people and they're talking about succession, because it's normally the responsibility of the manager in the role to start identifying people within the organisation that can do their role if they go to move on to do other things or retire. In terms of breaking it down for dairy farming, we're going to talk about the following things. First of all, is who is actually managing and leading that business, and who is taking responsibility for that. Okay. Also, we're going to look at the transfer of the operating business. What I mean by the operating business is, you know, there is a bank account, there is a business structure that receives the milk check, pays the bills, services the debt, etc. And someone's got to be responsible for that, and that's either through a number of partners or it may be a limited company. We're also going to have a little look at sort of, okay, if you own a business or your own assets relating to the business, you need to start thinking about, are you going to gift them to the next generation? Are you going to rent them to the next generation? Are you going to hire them to the next generation? Or are you going to make them purchase them off you? And it may be a mixture of all of those things. We will touch on a little bit, because me, Emma and David have talked about where people are going to live. Also, that can be very important on a dairy farm, because often those that are running it need to be relatively close to it. It often revolves around a farmhouse or properties on the farm. Okay, so moving on then, in terms of timing, I know David sort of laid out what his plan is. He sort of started thinking about this 5 years out from his 65th birthday, that, you know, that is the line that sort of David's drawn in the sand there. I really think, you know, from my experience of seeing different people at different stages of doing this, you know, the earlier the better, you know, and the younger the better, and that's for everybody involved. I think Emma's mentioned there that she would appreciate a longer run into taking on this business than just a turning around at the start of 1 year and going, oh, by the end of the year I'm off. So really I really sort of applaud David's approach of taking 5 years here. You know, what's the absolute minimum? Well, you know, a lot of these things can take up to a year to sort out if you're messing around with title deeds and all those sort of things, and you're doing it alongside running your day job. So 3 years, I would say, is an absolute minimum that you need to be thinking about this. I think what David's done is 5 years is good, but also, as you'll see when we come later on, whenever you're making decisions around sort of big things, or sort of investments or land purchases, then you do need to be thinking about, oh, how does that link into my succession? So I would say actually you start thinking about your retirement almost in your 30s and 40s, because there's a number of things here that I've got at the bottom as well. It is also linked to your pension and your retirement planning when it comes to your finances, and so all those things do link in together. So I'm really saying that the earlier the better. In terms of what age should the next generation be, I think it's really hard to say there is an appropriate age. From my experience, I will have seen people from the age of 21 up to over 30 taking businesses on and it working well, and even to the point, a bit like what Emma's done. I think more and more now we are seeing people that have even gone away and done another career that is not dairy farming. So they may have, you know, studied something different, perhaps at university, or gone into a different sector and worked till they're, you know, worked in that sector for a good 10 years, and they could be coming home in their early 30s to the family dairy farm and completely reskilling up from totally another sector. And so even if your next generation is not interested in farming and they're in their 20s, it doesn't mean they may not come home and help run the business in their 30s. You know, that is happening more often. In terms of, you should also always probably be thinking about, what's my plan B here? So if you don't have a next generation, or you don't have a next generation that wants to come home and be interested in dairy farming, you need to think of, well, what's my succession plan look like? So David, you know, that is something also you should look at as well. What if Emma turns around at the end of the 4 years and goes, I've got a fantastic opportunity, I'm going to go do that. What's the plan B there? We would see a lot of people looking at sort of either changing the way they run their dairy business. So you may go out of dairying to a different type of farming. You may go into a joint venture, or you may rent the farm out, or you may sell it and give it up and move on and do something different. But again, it's probably important to just think through those plan Bs as well. In terms of management of the business, so first of all, what we did is we identified the current structure and the roles and the time commitments of David. So David, could I just ask you to come in there and just describe to us how that currently works?
Yeah, I suppose for the last 15 years, I've been involved in things off farm. So I've been spending at least a day a week off farm, and some of that hasn't been the whole day, but if you tot up the hours off farm, it would probably amount to a day a week away from the business. And so that's been a regular occurrence. At the moment, obviously with COVID, I've been at home for a while, and some of my commitments finished in March, so I have actually got a bit more time at the moment, and in some ways I'm struggling to fill it as best I can. So it gives me an opportunity to think, well, I better go and find something else to do off farm, possibly. I am the managing partner in the business. We have house management and farm management. I come under farm management, and Lena comes under house management and also does the farm accounts. So the day-to-day purchasing decisions on what the forward plans are for the business, budgeting and all of that comes under my role. And also hiring and firing. But we haven't had to do a lot of that recently because our staff turnover is quite low.
Okay. And how long could you would regularly take holidays, David, and not COVID, not obviously, but like how long are you able to leave the farm for periods of the year and it can run without you being there day to day?
Yeah, if we take a break, we usually take a big break every couple of years if we can. So we take a good 2 weeks away in a block at any time, and then after that it's usually either weekends or maybe 4 or 5 days, but we certainly try and get a good block away about every 2 years. And with Lena's family being in Denmark, we try to get back to Denmark at least once a year if we can, and sometimes more. It's a good drive up through Holland and Germany, but if once you've done the trip, it's great to be in Denmark for the best part of 2 weeks.
Okay, so you have got a team available there that you're not sort of tied to the farm every day, but you've been able to go away at periods, yeah.
Yeah, no, we've got a great team, and they've been here. So one guy's been here 20 years now. Another one I think has been with us 9, and then the third member of the team's probably been with us on and off for the last 3 years. So they know the business well. They can make their own decisions as well, and if it's a serious thing, obviously they can consult. And these days, mobile phones and internet, everything else gets us around most places in the world, doesn't it? If it was really that serious, but also being fortunate that my parents are still here also makes a difference too. And now with Emma coming through, then if anything is needed, then they can call on Emma. Okay, so Emma, could you just, for the people listening, just give us a brief sort of run through your CV and what you currently do, Emma, and what your skills are?
Yeah, so currently I am training to be a chartered accountant with a rural bias. But I did a degree at Harper in agriculture, and I've also worked on a large calf rearing unit, done a bit of milk recording, done some relief milking. I do a lot of self-employed work too.
Okay, and I'm just sort of moving it on here then we have a bit of a talk about, okay, what we did with Emma. We sort of said, well, where are you now? What skills do you have? Given what is proposed in 5 years' time, where do you want to get your skills to, and how do you want to build your knowledge as well? And in terms of doing that alongside another career, Emma, not expecting to give me the complete answer, but we talked a bit about what's your vision for maybe running the dairy farming business alongside another career?
So yeah, that would definitely be my intention, with the majority of the week spent being an accountant. I work for a very flexible firm, so flexible working, part-time working they're really approachable. Probably looking at about 1 day a working week management on farm. So that's in the office, out on the farm. I will drive a tractor if I have to. I don't enjoy it, but I will do it. I'm qualified, as they say. But yeah, so probably 1 day a week management of the farm.
And in terms of, so I'm just going to run through these, Emma, and I'll probably get you to comment at the end. But so we had a session of 2 weeks ago now, and these are the sort of things that came out of our discussion. So the first thing is that it's quite important, I think, for Emma to build her own knowledge base and also start to build what her vision for the dairy farm going forward in 5 years' time could be, because inevitably, you know, we're under pressure to change our businesses all the time, and there's always improvements to be made. And I think it's also quite important that you don't get, no offense, David, but all your knowledge from David, and actually then that makes, that makes it more of a challenge, really. And we talked a bit about that you were either going to join or create a discussion group, hopefully in the local area. In terms of practical skills, you'd set out that you want to learn to AI. And then in terms of what we felt was an important things to do over the next 5 years was be involved in the current budgeting and planning meetings. So when David's sitting down to do his yearly budget or reviewing his budget, he's going to share that with Emma, just so she starts to build an understanding of the business that she's going to take on. We said that, you know, dairy farming is a long game at times. You know, we make investments in milking parlours or cow tracks that, you know, at the end of the day, probably have a 25-year write down. So any investment decisions made in the next 5 years do need to be made really with Emma's agreement, because, you know, at the end of the day, she will be having to work with that. So she hopes it's the right choice of asset or whatever it is that you're doing on the day, and also it's the right value of money that you want to put into that, because once the money is spent on those things in a dairy business, you know, it is the, you know, the responsibility of the person running it to generate that level of depreciation. We've also said that, I know, David, you don't change that many people very much, you've got a very settled team, but any sort of future employment decisions or discussions, even with key people that are in the team now, should start to involve Emma, so she's got an understanding of the team's skills that she's likely to take on. And also it's important that actually those skills start to match up to the vision of how Emma's going to run the business. So if you've got an area of particular weakness, it's always good to build a team with somebody else that's got that as a strength. We talked a little about also, so Emma needs to start building an understanding of the key relationships on the farm business. And, you know, broadly speaking, we were looking at sort of understanding about the milk buyer, understanding about relationships with key suppliers. The farm also does have relationships with other landowners in the area, where you have some sort of traditional grazing lets or some rental agreements. So again, it's important that Emma starts to understand what they are, understand the people behind it, so they know who Emma is and what's happening. And again, not to be negative, but I think it is important to this is, you know, whatever we are constructing here in terms of the vision for the succession plan, I think it's also important that Emma at this point starts to think about what are her exit options. You know, you never know what might happen. You might have a complete change of priorities in life, and you want to understand that if, you know, running this dairy farm is not for you for whatever reason, then what does that mean back for the family and also for yourself? So whatever we build, you understand what your exit options are at the start. Emma, do you want to come in on any of those things?
No, it's really nice. For me, it's nice to have a visual sort of, okay, this is what you can start working towards. This is how you can start the process, because it's quite a sort of like, where do I begin? So it's really nice for me personally to have, yeah, this is what you need to start doing.
Yeah, okay.
I've got a question, Emma, that's come in. What further, and David, what further skills may be needed by the farm team, especially as Emma, you're not going to be there 7 days a week on farm. So have you got some gaps that you've seen in the skills on farm?
I think one of them would be on the calf rearing side. So that would be one. I mean, we're autumn block now, so we could look at whether we have somebody to cover that period for the calf rearing. That would be one area, and certainly calf rearing young stock side of things, I think, would be one area that we could look at.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'd agree.
I think also what I would come in there, Brian, is it's as much about the skills, but also I would think it's about the organisation and discipline of communication within that team. and this is no offence to you, David, but you run a very relaxed, I'm there every day, whereas Emma's, if she goes down the route of only having 1 day a week, she's not going to have that luxury effectively, and so how the management of that business may have to change a bit as well. So it may not be the people change, but it's the whole communication and planning may have to change a bit to fit Emma's vision of having another commitment 4 days a week.
No, I think you're right on that. Communication certainly is key with any of this, but also how the team communicate with each other too. So, and so the responsibilities that they might have to take on over and above what they currently have, because they know there's the backup from me at the moment. But if that backup isn't there, whether they've got the character and to take those responsibilities on is important too.
Okay.
Yeah, and how do you deal with any knotty issues, say, which, you know what I mean, where it's maybe it needs a bit of debate, let's say between the two of you, you might not be completely in agreement on a particular issue? How do you deal with that? Or
I suppose as a family, we're not great ones for conflict, so that's probably sometimes you avoid things for as long as you can, but also we're generally patient until the point that the fuse goes. So I think that's probably how things tend to work. So we do talk things through. We're pretty good on all of that.
They're quite information gatherers.
Yeah.
So I think if there was an argument, we would both have good supporting evidence. So we'd have to weigh it up. But definitely we'd be fact-based when we make the decision.
Yeah.
okay, well, that's good to know. And then also, Emma, with the team, they've been there some time. You get a good working relationship with them because you've sort of worked with them over the years, I suppose.
Yeah, so one of them, literally, I've grown up with him. So he's been there sort of in the background pretty much my whole life. But it will be interesting, and it's probably one of those things you won't ever know until the day it happens. But how will they respond to the change in management? I think you couldn't predict that now. It's one of those things that's going to be what it will be. And with it being gradual, it might be better. Probably will be better. Yeah,
I mean, we certainly found when I took on from my father that one of the guys resigned at the time, which he said partly because I had grown up with him, a bit like Emma saying she's grown up with one of our guys, is that the difficulty for him was going to be taking orders from me when I was the boy. As far as he was concerned. So, you know, you do get that in teams. It doesn't matter which business you're in, you'll get that where some can't face the new characters in charge.
Yeah, no, that's true. I'm sure that does happen, and there would be farms which would face that situation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on then. So the next thing is about really breaking down the returns from a dairy farm. And often in dairy farming businesses, we mix all our profit up into one big lump sum, and we don't define what bit of profit was related to what input that we've put into the business. And you almost have to do this at first principle point to then be able to work through, well, who's due what at the business when we start to talk about succession of ownership and retirement planning and income streams. So basically then down the left hand side, what I'm saying is these are the things that you put into a dairy business, and down the right hand side is what you should be taking out. Obviously land is relating to owner occupier businesses. If obviously you're a tenanted business or a mixture, it is only for the land that you own and you're not paying rent on. So effectively what I'm saying is if you own land and you let the dairy business use it, it should generate a rental return. In a minute I'm going to come on to some worked examples for David and Emma's business. In terms of then on top of the land, we have the sort of infrastructure and buildings next. So again, you're really two things you should be pulling out of that. One is a depreciation to rebuild or replace the asset at the end of its life. Sometimes, especially because dairy farming is those long-running assets, that can get neglected at times, and that means that you then end up in a situation when the reinvestment comes that you either don't have the borrowing capacity to do it or you don't have the cash to do it, and it looks like a big number. But if you respect the depreciation on a yearly basis, effectively that should not happen. In terms of then we add the machinery and the livestock, and we basically get to basically a sum of capital. And what we're saying is that for whatever value of capital that you invest in the business, as if you were a shareholder as such, you should be looking to get a return on that capital invested. The next thing is obviously people put labour in, and you'll see I have split out here labour and management reward. So labour is, you know, without being crude, is for being there, using your hands, using your feet, and an element of your brain to operate the task. So you basically get an hourly or salary rate that reflects that. And the last bit is around management reward. So if you've made that all happen, and you've been responsible for making that all happen, you effectively should get a management reward above and beyond just getting paid for your time, and that should really be a share of beating the targeted returns above. And for example, if you looked at like a joint venture maybe as an example of what's a fair reward, a lot of dairy joint ventures that are set up, once they've generated those returns for land, infrastructure and capital and time, often the operator gets to keep 80% of that. And I believe that that's right, because the hurdles that I'm going to show you in a minute are reasonably high and can be hard to hit sometimes, and it's only through excellence of management that they are hit. And so effectively, you know, if we were sat in a corporate boardroom now, whether you like it or not, we would reward the directors and the runners of the business for delivering that result. In terms of at Bridge Farm, we work through the following. So there's around 432 acres of owned land that the family put into the dairy business effectively. In terms of a rate of return, I've put £120 an acre a minute on the naked land as such, with no infrastructure. Basically, there will be one farmhouse provided to whoever's running the business. So we've put a rental return on that of 12,000. There's around 500,000 of tenants, fixtures and fittings. So that is basically milking parlours, internals to sheds, some sheds that have been put up recently, cow tracks, all those sort of things. And we've put a 5 plus 5% return on that. So that's basically a 5% depreciation charge, which goes with a broad sort of 20-year write down for a lot of the infrastructure, and a 5% return on capital. So that comes to 10% in total. So we need to generate 50 grand a year for that £500,000. There's £409,000 of livestock. We've put a target rate of return in that of 10% return on capital. So that's coming out at £40,000. There's £250,000 worth of machinery. We've put a 10% return on capital on that. So that's 25 grand. And at the minute, David is the one sort of sole provider of time and labour and management to the business, and I've put him in at 35,000. That's a standard figure that we've been using for our benchmarking now for imputed family labour unit. So effectively, then, you know, we're looking that this farm should be generating £214,000 to deliver all those returns. We had a look back in the accounts, and it is able to do that at the minute. There were some years where it hasn't done that were a bit more tricky for whatever reason, whether it was sort of low dry matter growth or poor milk prices. But given a fair wind, at the minute, this business is able to generate that. There's probably a question around, okay, are those returns fair? Well, at the minute, I would say they probably are, but you also got to remember that the landscape is changing a little bit at the minute in terms of certainly subsidy. So, this business will be getting less subsidy in 5 years' time, and we may be changing the goalpost a little bit and saying, well, look, it might be a slightly slower rental return, or it might be a slightly lower return on capital due to there's less subsidy available to this business. So that's the rates where we are at the minute. You'll see in a minute, well, in a few minutes, we'll loop back to this when we work through some other examples. It's a really good exercise to do, because if there's the real crucial issue here is if you have a business that isn't able to deliver those returns, okay, for land, capital provided and labour, succession is going to be really difficult, because ultimately somebody's having to subsidize something somewhere. So either somebody's maybe providing land and not getting a rental return, maybe somebody's working for nothing, or maybe somebody's put a big chunk of money into machinery and livestock and they're getting no return on it. So there's a real thing around here that succession is a lot easier to do when the business is really delivering. If your business isn't delivering on that, you then need to do some what if budgets around, well, why are we not delivering that? And if we don't deliver that, it's going to make succession very hard, because we can't generate those returns. Just going on then, so there's the next thing is around successful structures, really, and there's quite a crucial point here in terms of how do you want to go about doing this, and I'll just talk you through what I see as the sort of, at the minute, sort of very general but two options. Okay, so if you maybe, and the first one is sort of group ownership of assets and profits together, and what that means is that very similar to what David's done with his parents, and probably quite common, is, well, okay, well, we'll just make Emma a partner in the business, but it still means that we pool all our profit together and we all work away all year. And it may be that Emma's working away managing the farm, and David becomes more of a silent partner in the farm, and basically he leaves his capital in, maybe gives a little bit of guidance every now and again, but effectively is not doing the day-to-day running of the farm. They agree how they're going to split the profits at the outset, and when they split those profits, they get split out in the, if it stays as a partnership, a partner's capital account. And basically that, in essence, makes certain things very easy. So sort of decision making that interlinks the two generations is all done really through that partners or shareholders agreement. That is really what is, you design how you want to split the profits, you design how you want to run the business. The other option is something that I picked up probably from New Zealand first of all, but it's this sort of single ownership of assets and profits. And that, in essence, could look something like the following. So Emma could come in and she could become the contract farmer on the family farm. She would buy into some of the machinery. She would maybe start buying some of the dairy herd as she retained her profits. There effectively would be two separate trading businesses, and there would be an agreement between the existing partners and Emma in terms of what returns she has to generate, what profit share she gets at the year end. But ultimately, once she's made profit and it ends up in her business, you know, that is separate from the family business. There is no right or wrong way of doing this, but you just need to sit down probably at the start and have a little conversations around, well, what would work for us and why. Often it's about how people work together. You know, if people weren't great at working together, perhaps, or you had people that had hugely different sort of drives and ambitions, but you still wanted to do succession, the sort of single ownership of assets and profits makes a very, very clear and definable goals. So once certain returns have been generated for the family, then the rest of the profits is for Emma to keep, and the governance of those decisions would be through whatever agreement you had, whether it was a tenancy or a contract farming agreement, or maybe even a separate equity partnership. There is other weaknesses would be that very much apart from being a supporting parent, David would not be in business with Emma and would not be part of the operating business. So one word of caution would be that once you're running that sort of business and you didn't have either a business partner perhaps, or a partner in terms of a husband or a wife or whatever that was sort of involved in that business, it can be a very lonely place to be running that business on your own, and you may want to think about that. The final thing in there then is around that you can actually do a bit of both of these things. So you could have a group ownership structure which involved all the family, but you could have a single ownership structure that Emma's involved in as well, that is running the day-to-day of the dairy farm. And that you know, I have seen people do that, and that can work as well. And that's a little bit of a foot in both camps, but it does make it easier. The other thing I would say is it also depends what Emma's going to do. You know, so I've seen a few examples where if Emma had ambitions to go and run other farms on top of the family farm, or maybe had other relationships that she would use. For example, she may have a farm where she wants to rear her heifers, but she would have that relationship herself. So if you think that the next generation is going to go on and do more than just the family farm, it's quite good to set up that separate ownership structure already, because it makes it very clear then for making those decisions, because it's not a decision for everybody to make whether Emma can go get a contract farming agreement on the farm next door. It's for her to make, and it's for her to be able to decide, as long as I meet my commitments that I've made on my current agreement with my family, and my bank will lend me the money to go do it, then I'm free to go do it. David and Emma, we talked a bit about this. I don't know whether you want to pass any comment. I know you've probably not quite made your final decision about what sort of structure you might going to pick, but is there anything I've said there that resonates with yourselves or doesn't?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, I think one of the things when I discussed this with Iain briefly before we started putting this presentation together was the fact it can be that Emma comes in, as you say, as a partner, and basically you're just moving the business on to the next generation slowly that way. But I can also see the options that you mentioned of having a bit of a hybrid of the both, because also with Erica being, you know, part of the family, she's not part of the business, but there has to be a way of as which I think you come on to later, of how we bring her into the sort of the capital side of things. So whether she ends up coming in or whether we end up buying something for her, say a house or something, that way we take some money out of the business that goes towards Erica, then there are ways of doing that. But also if we were, say for instance, Lena and I were to move to Denmark, then actually it might be a sensible way to do it would be to have the single ownership, so that Emma has the responsibility and she does it that way.
Okay. Any thoughts from yourself, Emma?
No, I don't. Not at the moment. I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on to my next bit, which you just focused on, David. Oh, Brian, have you got a question?
Yeah, Oliver, I've got a question come in. Are there any solutions where the older generation is keen to retire before the younger generation is in a position to take over the business? So that's a
yes,
scenario.
I think there are, and with examples of that, Brian, I would suggest that you either have a few options. You either going down employed management. So if it's you physically don't want to do the work, or you don't want to do all of the management, but you may be happy to look over the business, it will be you basically have to employ more people of a maybe perhaps better skill level than you have before to just manage the business in that interim period. Or it may be, you know, I know we've set up a joint venture last year where it was very clear that the next generation were just going through university and all that, and they weren't going to come over the farm, but mum and dad had decided they'd done enough now, so we put in place a 5-year joint venture. We were very clear when it was sort of recruited for that this is to get the farm from A to B, and there would then be a pause of the joint venture, and the family may take the farm back in hand, or if none of the next generation want to come home, then they were going to go probably into another joint venture. Brian.
Right. Thank you.
And I think just on that, Ollie, that's where that plan B could come in as well. For if Emma gets to a stage in 4 years' time, says actually it's not the right time, then that's where a plan B could kick in, either with a neighbour or something where there's a 5-year, 10-year or 15-year FBT put in place, or you have the likes of one of the management companies that come in and do it. I'm sometimes loath to some of the management companies because they strip out all of the assets and leave you with a lot of liabilities if they pull out after 15 years.
I think really I would say, David, it's just around good governance, and even if you own a farm and you go into a joint venture, you have responsibilities to hold the operator of that farm to account, to keep it up together, keep the milk contract and all those things, and it has to be managed.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on then. So just, David, you did touch on the sort of dealing with non-farming family. I think traditionally we probably shied away from this a bit too much as an industry, and I really think that I think most people now would say the ultimate goal is to award everyone the same level of opportunity. And again, it's just about breaking it down into the above points, really, that in essence, okay, you know, if we use you guys as an example, Emma is getting an opportunity here to come home and enter into a business that is already running, probably going to get some capital support from the family and all those things. So the argument is whatever opportunity you are giving Emma, in a modern way, we try to now say, well, we should afford Erica the same opportunity, and it may not be in dairy farming, it may be in another business opportunity, or it may be buying a house, or all those sort of things. So I think it's also quite good to clearly communicate this to everybody involved in the family, that whoever the sibling or whatever it isn't coming home to farm, they get clearly told, well, this is what your other sibling's doing and this is the opportunity they're getting. But it also comes with the following caveats that, you know, Emma may be tied into a 5 or 10 year agreement and all these sort of things. But whatever opportunity you give Emma in terms of perhaps gifting some startup capital to the business, or allowing her to use the family farm as security to borrow against, all those things are then given as the same opportunity, and it has to be all worked back into the same business plan. There is other things you can do. You know, often the challenge of dairy farming, as we come on to a minute, is that certainly when you start owning land, is that the asset value is high now, but it often doesn't generate a cash flow that high relative to the asset value. And a lot of people try to go down the route of keeping the farm together, as a phrase. So really, if you want to do that, ultimately you have to build up enough equity off farm to make the splits easier. Some people do that by paying into life policies. Some people do that by building up other assets off farm, whether that's property or shares or other investments. And there also is, you don't have to, you know, if you look at that group ownership model, you know, there could, you know, if the other siblings are happy with having X amount of their asset base tied up in land, you know, there's an agreed rental return there. So they could at a future date, they could have an income stream which is their share of the rent of the farm, effectively, which means you don't have to maybe sell the asset or remortgage the asset to split the equity fairer. So you don't always have to split the equity, you just have to make sure it's a sort of equitable sort of solution to who gets what income and who gets what assets. I'm going to move on, David, unless you want to come in on anything on that. Okay. I will move on. That's fine. So the final, well, not the final bit, but the next bit really is that those that are retiring really do need to think about their income streams and how that ties in. So it's just about sitting down and going, what income do I require? What off-farm pensions investments do I have? Often, you know, people have paid into pensions and they haven't really kept a check of them, what they're worth, what income will I get. So it's probably a good time when you're starting to plan these things that you have a session probably with a financial advisor that's trained at looking at these pensions, because you will have options of capital drawdowns at certain points, or level of monthly income or yearly income. What are my actual living costs? So a lot of farmers like to tell me that they live really, really cheaply and they barely take any money out of the business. But then we actually go through the accounts and go, well, hang on a minute, we've got X amount of private cars here, we've got household bills, all those sort of things. And you've got to remember that if we move this succession thing on, you effectively you don't have a right to just pay for your MOT using the farm business account effectively. So you do need to really probably have a session itemizing out, what are my actual living costs? What am I actually drawing out of the farm? You know, down to the cans of dog food, if we're being honest. And then you have to go, well, that's what I need. Be sensible about your retirement budget. You know, there's one thing when you've spent all your time farming and then you don't spend your time farming, you're highly likely to spend slightly more money than you currently do because you've got more time on your hands. The other thing is, don't forget about inflation. You know, the cost of living does go up, so you need to build that into your plan as well. And then once you've got what do I need, you need to then go through, well, what am I going to generate from my assets? What's my passive income? So doing like what we've done for David, which I'll show you in a minute, is what rents should, in theory, should I receive? What return on capital am I going to get? You may need to look down and go, what assets do I need to sell to fund my retirement? You know, so everybody will be able to retire and keep all the capital to the end. You know, it's quite common in a normal walk of life that you have to start cashing in the capital on the pension sometimes if you haven't built a big enough pot to just live off the passive income. I don't think there's any shame in that. It's just making sure that you understand that, and that may have to be part of the plan. We're going to come on to debt in a minute. So the other thing is we often may end up in a position where we've got debt to service at the end as we come to our retirement, and just, you know, complete a sensible budget, and then you can start to understand what's possible and what's not possible.
Oliver, I've got two questions. How does it work gifting assets if they are used as security for loans?
Well, you just have to have the question is, you have to go all the way back and say, what's the debt for, if that makes sense. So if the debt is for the dairy business, for example, and maybe in this example, if Emma's then going to use the land as security for similar debt, then that's fine. Whoever owns the asset has to, you know, you've obviously got an agreement with the lender at that point, so they have to be in agreement with it. But it doesn't mean you can't move the deeds on. It just means you've also got to move the security on. Next question, Brian.
Iain, any comment on that from your side?
Yeah, well, there is one, which is stamp duty land tax. When you make a gift of, say, farmland down to the next generation, you generally don't pay stamp duty on it. But if there is debt attached to that, and you're not party to the debt in the first instance, then potentially there is stamp duty on the value of the debt that gets passed across when the gift is made, and it can be quite substantial.
Okay,
so I'm going to move on, Brian, because we'll
just a second question, which I think we need to get in. What potential should people consider scaling farm enterprises down between succession? This would make it easier for the next generation to work off farm as well as run the farm.
I would say that the business should be run, you know, to meet the owner's objectives and to meet the long-term balance sheet goals. If within that you want to scale the business down and that works, I've not got a problem with it. But I wouldn't say, you know, you shouldn't just scale a business down just because you're doing succession. That I would say, if it needs to be that scale for whatever reason, the challenge is, you know, the next person coming in needs to upskill so that they can run it straight away, or you may need a period of handover where you run the business together for a few years.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go on to dealing with debt then. So once you've effectively had a little look at, okay, what am I going to gift, what am I going to rent, what am I going to hire, what am I going to make my next generation buy off me, you may end up with debt still left on your balance sheet as the person who's ending your business career, to say. You have to sort of ask yourself a few key questions. What is the debt for? So does it relate to an asset? Does it relate to a milking parlour that we built 10 years ago? Does it relate to some land that we purchased? And normally, in essence, they should go with the debt, should go with that, and it should be able to be serviced with that. But often in some of our agricultural businesses, we end up with a build-up of debt that is just either historic losses that got written off at a point and a big overdraft got turned into a term loan or something like that. So it's not just as clear. And basically, if you've done a budget and you can't service the debt basically with the assets that you're left holding, you basically have the following options. Is anybody willing to make cash sacrifices to aid long-term balance sheet objectives? Okay, so what I mean in that is saying, well, we've done your exercise, Ollie, and we've been all the way through it, but neither of our, you know, one of the budgets doesn't add up, which we're going to look at in a minute. Somebody's got to make a sacrifice of probably cash flow, so you're making the profit somewhere, hopefully, but somebody's got to commit to buying that equity in that land or that purchase that you've done. If nobody says yes, you then got to say, well, can we sell anything that doesn't drastically change the plan? Do we have a cottage or a house or a building that could be developed that doesn't change the dairy farming plan, that could release some equity? It may be the right time to do that. I know sometimes as farmers, we like to hang on to all the assets forever, but if it means making the plan work, then it may be the right thing to do. We'll come to some tax stuff in a minute on that. And equally, if you do all of those things and you can't get it to add up, the best thing you can do is work out positively what you and your family members are going to go do with your equity and skills. And I have seen some examples of that, of people, maybe going, well, look, we've just got to a place here with a few late land acquisitions that we can't make this work. The person doesn't want to give up the cash flow sacrifice of servicing a big debt for the next 20 years. Then you may sell that farm or sell some of that farm and go do something else, whether it's another business or another farm that's the right scale, or maybe go back to jump into a tenancy or something like that. So, but it's doing it from a positive viewpoint. If you get to that point, you just have to accept that and work on what the positive outcomes are. You've still got equity, probably. You've still got skills. You can still go do positive things. I'm just going to come to the worked example here. So in terms of, we had a little play around when I was sat with Emma and David, and we went with an example of that Emma has very diligently saved up a little bit of money herself. So we did the work that she would go buy all the machinery to run the dairy farm as basically her equity introduction to the farm, and then that would leave the sort of the higher generations of Cottons left to then have the rent from the owned land, the rent from the house, the return from the tenants' fixtures and fittings, and the return on capital on the livestock, and that came to 154,000. The current requirements for profit when we went through that, and this is, I think we mentioned very early on that, another challenge here we've still got 3 generations involved in the business. So what we're effectively doing is saying, right, well, David, you've got your agreement with your parents, and we're going to lump you all together and put you on one side of the table, and we're going to put Emma on the other side of the table. And so from David and his parents' perspectives, we on average have been taking 54 grand of drawings, and due to a recent land purchase back in 2017, we've still got some debt to service from that land purchase. So what we're sat with here is a deficit of around 27,000 a year. What we've said is David's going to go away. He's got to do his budgets for his pension income to see if he can bridge that gap to make that work. If that doesn't work, we're going to be coming to Emma and saying, well, do you want to start owning equity in land at any point within the next 10 years? So at that point, we may look at a model that means that some of basically Emma's retained profits from what she does will help service the debt on the loan on the farmland. And I think for those that end up in this situation, it's not an uncommon situation really, and you've just got to go back to the basics of, well, why do we end up here? The challenge is ultimately that we buy agricultural land in the UK for maybe £8,000, sometimes £10,000 an acre. I'm giving you a rental return at best of sort of £100 to £200 an acre, maybe if you look at some of the fixtures and fittings. And we don't really have loads of interest-only offers out there, although the interest rate is cheap. Even if you take a 25 or 30-year mortgage on the land purchase, you're looking at a sort of 6% return needed to service debt, and even another 1% return on top of that. So if you've bought land for 10,000 an acre, you need to generate £500 or £600 an acre plus £100 an acre for tax. Well, all of a sudden it's not probably going to generate you £700 an acre, so you need to use profit from other sources to service that debt. Or you may look at it and say, what is that gap worth in capital? Okay, and I worked it out earlier this morning that to bridge that £27,000 gap for the Cottons, it's about it's about £500,000 lump sum needed to lower the amount of debt serviced. that's where we got to, and that's really where you want to get to in terms of your examples. Brian, have we got any other questions on that, or we just move on to the tax thing?
I've got one question. The potential disaster. What potential disaster plans have you considered, David and Emma? Is there anything that sort of which you think could happen, and that you've got to, as things going wrong, in other words? And,
yeah, well,
and how would you deal with
you
it?
could depends how optimistic or pessimistic you are in life, Brian, on that. You could make a very long list, but I suppose the top of it is one of us dropping dead tomorrow, and that is one of the ones, which is, and that's where life cover comes in and things like that. So that is one of the options. Also, it is catastrophic disease issue on the farm, whether it be TB or something else. It could be a massive fire, all sorts of things. But you've got cover for a lot of those things. But at the end of the day, we've still got the land. So if, as Ollie says, if worst comes to worst, you can sell some of the land. So, because at the end of the day, we have got a debt that we have to sort out. And if you have to start again, you've got to start again, haven't you? I mean, that's one of those things that you've got to look at, really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to move on then. So we, and Ian, I'll invite you to come in a bit then. So we just said, look, we do need to keep an eye when we're planning these things on what the tax implications could be. That's either like on an income basis, planning the structure of your business and what sort of profits individuals are planning to make and what they want to do with it, sort of drives you towards planning the structure. There's a lot of capital taxes that you need to be aware of probably when you're planning these things as well. I just want to give you a brief overview, and then we may just take any questions, I think, at the end. So herd basis is a really useful tax relief that those that own herds of cows get. For those that have flocks, you can have flock basis as well. I would say you probably want to be looking to use that every generation, if possible, effectively when you move the dairy herd from one generation to the next. Things to watch out for, I think we touched on a little bit. So if you are perhaps, if we're using David's example there, selling off some land or selling off a building, you always need to remember that they're probably highly likely, due to the way some asset inflation has gone, that you're likely going to have to pay some capital gains tax on that. So whenever doing your budgeting, you need to always think about the net sum that you will get. So you might be thinking, oh, wow, I bought that cottage for 10 grand, I'm going to sell it for 100 grand. Well, that 90 grand is not all yours. Some of that will have capital gains tax attached to it. We've touched on stamp duty a bit there. You also do need to be aware of, if you are planning your inheritance tax and you mainly own agricultural property or even business property, that there is certain things you need to be aware of in terms of APR, agricultural property relief, or BPR, business property relief, when you're looking to claim that at the point of probate. Have we got any questions coming on any tax stuff, Brian, or we just leave that to the end?
Leave it to the end. Nothing specific at the moment.
My final slide then is the don'ts. Okay, so rather than doing conclusions, I thought I would finish with a strong don't do this, don't do that. So don't do nothing. These things will not sort themselves out. They will not get any easier if you leave it any longer. The big thing around communication, some of these conversations can be very difficult, especially if you're, looking at some negative budgets or some negative scenarios, and people can get very emotive and uptight, about, people put a lot of work and effort into looking after dairy farms. And so, can be easily offended. So I would say there's a lot of help out there in terms of getting somebody in to maybe help facilitate that discussion, or even whether it's just a valued friend of the family, someone to just sit in and make those meetings constructive, if you're ending up having very negative conversations. For me, a real bugbear is seeing sort of poorly set up partnerships or limited companies. So, just making the next generation a partner is not doing succession properly. And equally, if it's not clear how you're going to split the profits, how do you know what's fair? And that's my other bit is I see a lot of people end up they're farming away, working hard, and then the accountant rings them up and goes, "All right, I've got to finalise the accounts today. Do you want to pay the least amount of tax?" And most farmers nod, yeah, I want to pay the least amount of tax. And they just divvy up the profits in the capital accounts with no regard for who's done what, why they've done it like that. You know, a big thing I would see is, you know, people claiming child tax credits and stuff like that. Well, look, at the end of the day, you should be in business with the goal of making a profit. So you want to be, you know, those capital accounts in partnerships or directors loan accounts or shareholders funds in companies is very important. You may have an agreement that supersedes that, but if you don't, ultimately that is all you're due if that business came to an end. My final 2 points is around don't accept low returns. Okay, so if your dairy business is generating low returns, it's going to make all these things really difficult because somebody is going to have to put something in for nothing. Okay, and the same goes for that, is that don't allow, you know, members of the family to work on farms for returns, because again, you're asking them to do something for nothing. If it doesn't work, you need to have more of a major overhaul rather than all just accepting low returns for a long period of time. Brian, that's all from my presentation. So I'm gonna stop sharing and we'll just take some questions for a few minutes.
All right, questions for the panel. What is your advice for a mid-50s tenant who, after working for little on the basis that all will be made right, finds him or herself in a scenario that the goalpost has been moved and the buyout option is leaving him in a high-risk situation with no off-farm security and no historic succession advice, despite voicing concerns? I think that is a scenario that could be in some cases.
Yeah, I think the ultimately is you've just got to start working to secure maximum capital on your balance sheet as a tenant, and that may be, you know, it may be exploring some of the exit agreement options that we think are coming down the path with BPS. If you've got did we say a low returning business, Brian? I think was part of the question. So
it didn't say the business, right, but in a scenario where they've been working for, you know, they're working with the future, looking to the future, that's when everything for them will come right financially, but they're grafting away.
You have to, like the golden rule of pension and retirement planning is building the capital base. You know, right, that is what pensions are, that is what good succession planning is. So I would say it's about securing the best capital base they can given the time period they've got.
And can I just add that certainly I would have spoken to all of my tenant farmers a long time ago, and every tenant farmer, I think, should try their best to have an off-farm house, somewhere they can go to if it all goes wrong, or for when they retire, even if it's not the property they're eventually going to retire into.
As even like an investment, it can be an investment.
Well, it basically means you buy in at a certain level of inflation as well, because that is the challenge with houses. You know, they just seem to go up whatever happens in the economy at the minute. So yeah, I would agree with that, Ian.
Very good. I would say a question for Emma, really. Is there any part of the journey so far, Emma, that you'd like to have done differently? And I'm going to ask David the same question, but Emma first.
No, I don't think so at the moment. I try to so I come back to the farm most days and try and spend an hour in the office each evening, and it's just really valuable. Sometimes I feel I wish I'd written stuff down, but then I don't know what I would have written down. So it's just trying to capture that and finding a way that suits you to capture all the information. I'm sure it's in my brain somewhere, but I don't like to rely on my brain too much.
Right. Okay.
And for me, Brian, yeah, for me, I think one thing is that to make sure that I've been retraining along the way, so that I have been able to keep up with things up to this point. There comes a point where I don't really want to do much more retraining. So that's really where you start thinking about next generation is you know, I'm fortunate that I have someone who does want to succeed into the business, but if they didn't, then I would still be having a succession discussion, but it would probably be on the lines of, okay, do we get in a management company, or do we rent the farm out and we move off farm? And that's where some of the other figures that Ollie came up with would be really relevant. So I think that's where we are at the moment. If neither of my daughters had any interest in the business, I would certainly look up something up like an FBT for 15 years, so that then in that time period they might change their mind, or they might marry somebody or be with someone who could be or want to run the business.
Right. No, good, excellent. I think one for Iain. What's the difference between renting the farm out and share farming the farm in terms of inheritance tax planning? Should successors have knowledge of what's in the wills and letter of intent? A good question.
I think in terms of inheritance tax, that's quite difficult to answer in a minute. At the moment, because you do get agricultural property relief, which is relief from inheritance tax, you get inheritance tax relief on the farmland, the farm buildings, and the farmhouse, whether you rent it out or whether you share farm it, as long as the farmhouse is rented out as part of the farm business tenancy. So in a practical sense, there is no great difference from that. There are many other taxes where there are differences.
And you've got to have owned the farm, is it for 7 years before you can do that? So you can't just buy a farm and rent it out. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. It's 2 years if it's share farming. You've got to have owned the farm, and 7 years if you rent it out.
Okay.
I think Brian, I think the point about the wills and knowing what's in wills and the next generation letters of intent, if you can have that conversation with your parents or grandparents, even in some cases, then it's really worth it, because that makes life so much easier to understand how things might pan out.
Yeah, it's a vital point. Thanks for adding that. When adding, last question, I think we make this the last question. When adding people to a partnership, what do you need in a partnership agreement?
I'll answer that. Or do you want to go in, or shall I? I'll go first.
You go first. I'll just add anything.
Yeah, in essence, you should be agreeing to who's going to put what into the partnership. So often capital or time, okay, and then also how you're going to split the profits. How are you should also have in there sort of also how you're going to end the partnership for whatever reason. And then Iain, is there any other bits you want to add to that you've seen in agreements?
Yeah, certainly in the partnership agreement, the most important thing I see is whether land and buildings are partnership assets or owned outside of the partnership by individuals. And if they are partnership assets, in what proportion are you going to own those assets? And that becomes quite critical.
Yeah, I'll just back Iain up. That's really important. I see a real range of level of detail in partnership accounts, and ultimately it is actually very important, because often the partners may be servicing debt for land. Well, effectively that equity should go to the person who's gone to the effort of making the profit to then pay down the debt. And also it's in terms of agreeing to often I see it's good to see proper valuations done as well. So actually, if there's any inflationary increase in land prices, then who gets it? If that asset is sold and all those sort of things. So they're really important things to get sorted.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Final comment to David and Emma. Have you got any final comments about going forward from this point?
Yeah, I mean it's actually highlighted to both of us really the things we do have to think about, and actually it does give us a better picture of the way forward to get to that end goal. We as a family are also in the process of updating all of our wills with a view to making sure that everything is in place there too, because that's key to all of this. I think to help that succession is to understand where we are with our wills, because I know at the moment things like some of the land ownership is only in my name rather than being in shared names with Lena. So there's things like that we need to sort out now as well. So I think it's highlighting some of those other issues that we need to sort on the way to the end goal.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And Emma, anything from you?
It's really nice to sort of have a plan, and now we can start working on it and have regular conversations with Ollie, and just keep moving forward. It's really nice that we've got this 5-year time frame, because there's nothing worse than just question marks and not knowing, because it just fills you with worry otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong message to everybody, forward planning. Leaves me to thank you very much to the panel for a very excellent discussion, to thank you for the questions and everybody who's listened in. You can view it again on YouTube. Just to say, if you need any information from AHDB, speak to your local knowledge exchange manager. We're also looking for additional strategic dairy farms. So if you're interested or wanted to find out more about it, again, speak to your local KEM. It leaves me to thank you very much and best wishes for an excellent farming summer. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
Yeah.